Hello there, my name is Lynette and I am joining you from the Aquarium of the Pacific, and welcome to our Aquarium Online Academy. Behind me I'm joined by my teammate Soraya, who is controlling all of the magical things behind the screen, but I'm so excited to be here with you today. We're going to do some learning together, so hopefully you're excited to learn with me. Since we are the aquarium, of course we're going to learn about an ocean topic, and today we are going to be learning specifically about coral reefs. So I hope you are ready to be a coral reef scientist because it is one of my favorite habitats in the ocean and I'm so excited to learn with you. That being said, this is a virtual event and so we're going to be learning together, but there are some ways that we would love to hear from you. And so as you watch this live this morning at 9 a.m., you are welcome to text live questions to us. We have a phone number at 562-286-1838. So you're welcome to text that, and Soraya will be fielding all of those text messages. Or you can email any questions or comments you have to our email, which is live@lbaop.org. And those both channels of communication will be open throughout our stream, and we would love to hear from you as we learn together. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I mentioned that we're going to be learning about coral reefs, right? And that you all are going to be scientists with me, right? So let's just start off with what that means, right? What does it mean to do science, right? Have you ever thought about that? Right? I just want you to take a moment. Think about, what does doing science mean to you? Because it's actually pretty simple. Well, to me, doing science means making observations, right? And that might be a big word, but observations just is a fancy word for noticing, right? You can notice with your eyes, you can look carefully, you could notice with your ears, you can listen for sounds, and of course you can notice by feeling things. So if this was an in-person event, of course it's always a great idea to kind of touch and feel things. Those are all different ways that you can observe, right? So scientists observe, but they also think about their observations, right? So today we're going to do a lot of observations, right? We're going to be watching some videos and looking at some pictures. I want us to practice looking as carefully as we can and then thinking about what we see, right? Maybe what does that mean? What details do I notice? How are these things connected? Or maybe how does that work? Right? Those are all examples of ways that we might think about coral reefs today. Okay, so without further ado, let's practice those science skills. We're going to put up a video, actually a live stream, of one of the exhibits we have here at the aquarium. Here it is behind me. It's beautiful. This is our coral predators exhibit, and I would like us to practice doing science. Let's practice making some observations. So see what you can notice. It could be something obvious, or it could be a tiny detail. And let's see if we can notice at least 3 things. And if you would like to share your observations, please text us or email us at the information below. But let's just start off with making observations. Well, first of all, I'm noticing how beautiful this exhibit is. Right, so this is a coral reef habitat, and I'm noticing a lot of different colors, lots of different shapes, and some kind of rocky structures that I think is coral. I'm also noticing a lot of animals, right? Definitely a lot of different types of fish, and they all seem to be very colorful. I see one that's got some pretty cool looking fins, very wavy looking fins. And I think I saw a fish that was kind of bright yellow. There it is, right on the side. I wonder why these fish have so many different colors. Curious, maybe we'll learn about that today. All right, so if you've made some observations, please share them with us. We'd love to hear from you. But so far I've noticed a lot of things, right? It looks like a coral reef habitat is really lively. There's a lot of different animals. Oh, I saw a big one swimming right behind me, right? A lot of color, right, from the rocks and what I think is the coral in the background to the fish itself, right? And all the fish are different sizes and shapes. And I wonder why that is. So actually, let's start off by learning a little bit more about coral itself, and then we can learn about the animals that call the reef home. Hey, look, it's one of our fish right behind me. I love that one. We're actually going to learn about that one in just a moment. So where is the coral in this video? Well, the coral is all over. It's in the background. Right? I think we have maybe a picture of a little bit closer of a coral just so that we can look at the general structure. But I have an interesting question for you. So the coral is everywhere. It's all in the background, right? And when you observe the coral, when you look carefully, do you think that coral is an animal, a plant, or is it a rock? Kind of looked rocky to me from afar. But now when I look at it up close, it's a little bit confusing. It kind of looks a little squishy, like it might be alive. So let me step off so you can make a good observation. What do you think coral is? Do you think it is an animal, a plant? Kind of looks like a flower. Or do you think it's a rock? It also looked a little bit rocky. Right, if you have a guess, right, please go ahead and text or email us. I would love to hear what you think coral is. Okay, so that kind of was a trick question. Coral is all of the above. It is an animal, but it also kind of has some plant matter. We'll talk about that in a bit. And it is also a rock. So sorry I tricked you there. But coral is, I think, just one of the most incredible organisms in the ocean. So, if we were to look at here, you might notice that there's all of these kind of little buds or little branches. And actually, each individual one is an animal. So here's a great example, right? This is what's called a coral polyp, right? So that would be if we zoomed in on just one of those little kind of flowery branch-looking things. This is what you would see. So let's take a look at this coral polyp. Does it remind you of any other animals in the ocean? Something we have here at the aquarium is an animal called a sea anemone. And this is what a sea anemone looks like. That's actually really helpful. You can see how they look pretty similar. Well, actually, coral and sea anemones are related to each other. They are in a group of animals called cnidarians. Means that they can sting, right? So a sea anemone has, a body, kind of a base, and it sticks to the ground. And all of these tentacles around the side, that's what it uses to sting and catch its food. Well, let's look at that polyp again. Can we make any comparisons? I think so, right? Here's that little base of the body, and then this part, those are also tentacles that they use to sting, right? So they can sting and capture food like a tiny, tiny anemone. But I want you to look very, very carefully at this image of a polyp. Right? Look at the color or the pattern. Do you notice anything interesting? So the polyp itself is white, almost clear. But if you look, maybe you saw what looks like little green dots. And that's actually a really important observation. Those tiny little green dots are a kind of algae called zooxanthellae. Has a very fancy name. But that is a little tiny algae, right? Algae is things that you might see similar to like moss on a rock or kelp in the ocean. So these tiny, tiny little algal cells, they live inside of the polyp's body. I know that's kind of mind-blowing, but that's how it works. So they have what's called a symbiotic relationship. The little zooxanthellae live inside the coral and get protection, but algae can do something special, right? Do you know how plants get their food? Right, algae can do the same thing. So plants on land, right, and a lot of plants in the ocean, right, they do photosynthesis. Right, that means using energy from the sun to create their food. This algae can do the same thing. So each individual little algal cell can photosynthesize, and it can actually make food for itself, but also for the polyp. Right, so you can see why they're kind of best buddies. Right, the coral provides shelter and protection for the algae, and the algae lives inside happily and provides a little bit of food for the polyp. It's pretty amazing. But the cool thing too is I mentioned the polyp, it can sting and catch food. Okay, so now I really want us to use our science brains and think about, how can these two things relate to each other? Well, there's day and there's night on land and of course also in the ocean, right? And so when do you think would be the best time for the algae to make its food? During the daytime or during the nighttime? Well, if you're thinking during the daytime, you are correct. So during the day, right, the algae will just hang out and it'll produce its food using photosynthesis. And then what do you think happens during the nighttime? Well, the algae stops photosynthesizing, but the polyp can start hunting for food. It can start using those stinging tentacles and capturing food, right? So let's go back to this little video. It's really helpful. You can see those tiny little tentacles, right? So during the day, it would just photosynthesize, but then during night, those tentacles will kind of, kind of start moving a lot and capturing food. And that way the coral is producing food 24/7, right? It's just a different way of producing food during the day and the night. Right? I kind of wish I could do that. If during the day I could just photosynthesize, I wouldn't have to waste any time, eating lunch. And then if I could just hunt for food while I'm sleeping, that would be amazing, right? That's kind of what coral does. It's super productive. And I actually have a piece of a coral skeleton to show you, because I did mention that coral is also a rock. So let's see how that makes sense. All right, so we're going to switch over to my document camera. Hello, everybody. And I would like to show you a coral skeleton. So I know that in the pictures and videos we saw, it didn't really look like coral was particularly rock-like, but I promise you it is. So here is a close-up of some coral. Let me focus this to make sure that we can see. Give me one moment. There we go. So let's just take a look at a coral skeleton. So if you think back to that live stream that we saw, right, there was all of that kind of rocky background to the exhibit, right? And much of that was coral. And so coral can form a skeleton, and this is kind of what it looks like. If you were here touching it in person, it really does feel like a rock. It is quite light. It's very scratchy and hard. But if you look really carefully, you might see that it is covered in what looks like little kind of indents, right, or little circles. And remember, we looked at one individual polyp, right, which is the animal, but every single little circle on this coral skeleton would have housed a polyp, right? And polyps are colonial animals, essentially. So they live together, each one living in a tiny little hole, but all together they would create this, entire kind of unit of coral, right? And if you have many, many of these, then you can actually create a coral reef. And coral reefs are incredible because when you think about it, those are all individual animals that are living together to form an entire habitat. Right? So I like to think of it like an apartment building, right? Each little hole here would be kind of one unit, but you have all of these neighbors living together. And what they do over their lifetime is they secrete a material to make basically a hard shell, right? So that they can stay nice and stable in the ocean. But over many, many years, as that skeleton grows and grows, you get these huge rocky structures. And these are just amazing to me. I think it's so cool to look at, the place where individual polyps have lived. And when we watch that video, coral has a lot of different structures. So this is kind of one example, but I can show you another one. So you might have seen coral that looks a little more branch-like this one. So the skeletons may have different structures, but if you look up close, you can still see those individual little, indents where individual polyps would have lived. So that one is a really cool one. And then I have one more. This is a little bit of thicker branches, but coral can come in so many different shapes and sizes, right? But you can always look and find those tiny little holes where polyps have lived, right? And so that's why I kind of asked you a tricky question, right? Coral is both an animal. The polyp is an individual animal living in each hole. It is a plant because it has algae living inside of it. And it is also a rock because it's secreting, a mineral, right? That might seem weird to us, but a lot of animals secrete minerals, even we do, right, to create our bones and our teeth. So it's not that different from that process. But corals are amazing, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about kind of how they work. So now we've kind of set the scene. We've learned a lot about what makes coral coral. Let's learn about one of the fish that we saw in our coral predator's habitat. Maybe you noticed that big fish that was swimming around me. Here's a great picture of it. Let me step off so you can see. So this is a parrotfish, right? One of my favorite fish in the ocean. They just look so cool. Let's take a moment to make observations about the parrotfish. What do you notice? And you are welcome to text or email us to share any of your observations. I would love to hear from you. Well, first thing I notice is how colorful it is, right? It's that vibrant blue color, has all of these rainbow markings. It is a really beautiful fish. But remember, when we were looking at that coral reef, the coral is really colorful. Actually, it's that algae living inside of it that gives it all those different colors. So, if you think about if you were an animal living in a very colorful habitat, what would be your best strategy to blend in? Would it be to be very drab and maybe black or gray? Or would it make sense for you to also be really colorful, right? And you can see that in this video here. The coral itself is so colorful that the fish are multicolored too, because that actually just helps you blend in more, right? And so the same thing applies to the parrotfish. And the coloring of a fish, right, we can call that an adaptation. So an adaptation is, any trait on an animal that helps it survive in its habitat. So an adaptation of this parrotfish is that it's very colorful, right? And that helps it survive in its colorful coral reef habitat. Okay, what more do we notice about the parrotfish? I think we have another picture a little closer in on the parrotfish's face. And let's make some observations about this face. Oh my gosh, look at that picture. I love this picture. Look at its little mouth, right? It has such a cute little smile. And if you look very carefully, right, if I'm looking right here, it's got some chompers. Parrotfish have teeth. I actually think we have kind of a front-on picture, and we can get a really good look at a parrotfish's teeth. So let me step off because I don't want to block the star. Look at that. Look at that cute little smile. So they have all of these teeth, but the cool thing is if you notice, if you look really closely, those teeth are not individual teeth like we have. They're actually all connected. So their teeth are fused together, really creating something like a beak, right? So parrotfish have a beak. Oh, this is a really great image of it. And it's very, very strong. Can you think of something in the coral reef that would require some pretty strong teeth to bite through? Let me give you a hint. It was all around the reef. We actually just learned about it. So this habitat is called coral predator because there's our parrotfish is behind me now, but our parrotfish is the predator in this exhibit, and it eats coral. So coral is actually its diet, and it has those fused teeth creating a beak so that it can chomp through the coral, really similar to a bird's beak. And we looked at that coral skeleton. It is really hard, but parrotfish can chomp through that, right? And really they're kind of eating the animal, but they're going to break down all of that. And the really cool thing is that when they swallow and then poop out their food, it comes out as beautiful white sand. And so if you like white sand beaches and you've seen that and you think it looks really cool, you have the parrotfish to thank. They will produce a lot of beautiful white sand, which is just ground up coral skeletons. Kind of a crazy fact, but parrotfish are really cool. So that's another adaptation, right? That fused beak to help it bite through the coral. And we can also look at another animal in the coral reef, and we can kind of compare how different fish have different adaptations. So the parrotfish, it's a lot bigger, right? Its diet is the coral itself, and so it's got that fused beak to eat its food. But let's look at a different coral reef fish that has some different adaptations, right? And we'll do some comparing and contrasting. All right, so here's our next animal that we're going to learn about, right? And I'd like us to take a moment to make some observations, right? It's very different from the parrotfish. And that's the cool thing about doing science is that the natural world just has so much diversity and we can learn all about it. So what do you notice? Go ahead and text us or email us if you'd like to share. Well, I know it's hard to tell, but this fish is significantly smaller than the parrotfish. Parrotfish might be about this big. They can get quite large. This copper-banded butterfly fish, in real life, it's pretty small. It's maybe a couple inches in size. So much smaller. But do you notice anything, let's see, interesting on its face? Well, look at its mouth. Right? Whereas the parrotfish had those really strong teeth, what does this butterfly fish have? Look how skinny that is. It has a long snout for a mouth. Right? Let's think about that. Right? So we made our observation, and then let's think about what it means. So why would it be helpful for a fish living in a coral reef to have a long snout for a mouth? How could that help it survive? Well, remember, coral reef is full of coral. It has lots of nooks and crannies. And this is a very small fish. It can get into those little cracks. Right? Having a tiny little mouth means that it can wiggle into the crevices and it can suck up tiny, tiny prey. Right? So judging by the size of the butterfly fish's mouth, it's going to eat really small things. Its diet mainly consists of tiny worms, tiny little shrimp, and some fish fry, which is just a fancy word for baby fish. So its long snout helps it get into those cracks, and then it can suck up tiny prey. That is a really cool adaptation that butterfly fish have. Okay, what more do we notice when we look at the butterfly fish's body? Well, it is colorful, like the parrotfish, but it's kind of got a different pattern, right? So if you look at the butterfly fish, it's rocking some pretty bold stripes, right? And it has these white bands, right, with yellow in between. And if you think about it, a lot of the coral kind of has kind of a branch-like shape, right? So you can imagine it's making all of these branch-like structures, and having some white stripes, might help it blend into its environment. And so that is another really cool adaptation, right? The patterning on the body, right, can help it survive in its habitat. Okay, there's another really cool thing on our butterfly fish, and I want us to take a look. So can you find the eye of the butterfly fish? So if you said that it is, this, then you have a really good eye, right? But animals in the ocean don't necessarily have as good eyesight as we do. And you may have noticed that this little spot in the back also looks like an eye, right? And that is called a false eye spot. So there are a lot of animals on land and in the ocean that rock this adaptation, right? You may have heard of butterflies or moths that have this, right? But think about, why would it be beneficial to have a fake eye? Well, it helps with protecting it from predators, right? So if its eye is on the wrong side of its body, right, and a predator quickly sees this fish and thinks that, oh, this is the fish's head end, right, even if it was to go for the back of the fish, the actual important parts of the fish are on this end, and the fish can probably swim away. If it maybe got a little damaged, maybe it would get a nick on its back fins. But it's much better than a predator aiming for this end of the fish, because then you probably can't get away, right? So a false eye spot can kind of disguise the head and tail end of an animal and kind of trick predators. It's a really cool adaptation. And so these are just, two examples of fish, right, and the different adaptations they have. But there is another fish that I would like us to learn about that you could find in a coral reef. And we're going to put up a picture of that. And this fish is quite different. It has a very different body plan, but it'll be a great exercise for us to learn about the diversity in coral reefs. So this is the last fish that we're going to be learning about today. Are you surprised? Sharks are fish, so technically I stand corrected. So this is a fish that you can find in a reef. It is a shark, more specifically, and this is called a black-tip reef shark. So let's take a moment to make some observations about our black-tip reef shark. What do you notice when you look carefully at it? And on top of that, how is it different than the other fish that we've studied? Does it have any body parts or features that are things that we haven't seen before? Right, so comparing the butterfly fish to the reef shark, do you notice anything different? So one thing I noticed is its body shape is very different. I forgot to mention that if you were to look at that butterfly fish head on, its body is very, very flat and thin. Right? So from the side, you don't really notice anything, but if it turned to look at you, it really would be very, very thin. It has what scientists call a compressed body shape. Right? So it's kind of pressed into almost like a thin sheet. Right? And so the shark is very different. Its body is not as slim. Right? If you look at the shape of the shark's body, does it remind you of anything? Well, I noticed that it's kind of pointier on the front end and on the tail end, but the middle is a little bit wider. Some people might say that looks kind of like a football, right? Or maybe like a lemon shape, or how you would draw an eye, right? And You're right. That shape actually has a special name in science. That's how important it is. And it's called fusiform, right? So anytime you see something with kind of that lemon shape, let's see, I have a stuffed animal version of a shark, but this is a great, comparison tool, right? It's pointier on the end with the mouth and gets pointy by the tail. So this shark also has a fusiform body shape, right? And fusiform is football shaped. You have to think about, why would that be beneficial in the ocean? Well, being nice and pointy, right, makes you very streamlined in the water, so you can swim faster, right? And so there's less pushing through the water on the front end, and you can actually compare this shape to a rocket or an airplane. So this is a great image to kind of see that fusiform body shape. And that means that sharks with this body shape, they're very fast, right? And that's important. These sharks are predators, right? So they need to catch other animals to survive. So it's important that they can swim quickly so that they can catch up to their prey. So that's one really cool adaptation. What more do you notice on this blacktip reef shark? Well, something we notice compared to the other fish is that they have many more fins, right? They have a very large tail fin. They have this dorsal fin on its back, and also these pretty large pectoral fins. In general, fins are going to help an animal move better, right? And so a big tail is going to help that shark push through the water, right, so that it can accelerate. And the dorsal fin and the pectoral fins, they're going to help with staying upright and for steering. So let's watch this clip of some of our blacktip reef sharks in our shark lagoon swimming. You can see one in the background. They're really using that tail to propel them, and the front fins are kind of acting like wings on an airplane, right, helping them turn and navigate. And a lot of people ask us, how come there are fish living in the shark lagoon? Just like other animals, they are adapted to eat their food source, and so they're really not going to eat any fish that are not their diet. So these fish can live happily in Shark Lagoon with the sharks, but you can really see that motion very well, where it's using its big tail to push through the water, and that way, if it does see a fish that is its prey, it can catch up, and then it can catch it. And another really cool adaptation on the sharks is, you may have noticed their coloring, right? Whereas the coral reef fish were really colorful so that they could blend in kind of with the coral itself. If you look at an image of a blacktip reef shark, their color is a little different. So what do you notice about the color of this shark? Well, I see that it is more of a dark gray on its back, and then where its belly is, it's kind of a white color, right? And that actually also has a fancy name in science. It's called counter shading, right? So when an animal is darker on top and lighter on the bottom, it actually has this really cool effect when you're in the water, where if you were swimming, think about where the light is coming from. The light is coming from above. So if you're an animal below and you look up at a shark, you might just think that you're looking at the sunny water above you because that belly is so white. And then if you were above the shark looking down, all you see is that dark back kind of blends in with the darker seafloor. Right? So counter shading is another really cool adaptation that sharks have to help them survive in the ocean. But we've learned about so many different coral reef animals today, from the coral itself to various kinds of fish, all the way to a pretty top predator, right? A blacktip reef shark. I hope you had a good time. And if you were joining us, you are welcome to continue to text or email us. And we have another live stream at 10 o'clock today where we will be learning about marine mammals. So if you're interested in that, please join us. Thank you very much. And I hope you had a good time learning about the ocean. Bye, everyone.